Welcome to our first edition of MIRANET Talks. I'm Trevor Isaac, Vice-Chair of MIRANET. We've got Sue Shanley over here, who is the Chair of MIRANET. And our very special guest today is Meghan Nicholls, who is the CEO of Food Banks Mississauga.
Thanks for having me. Well, thanks for coming to visit us.
Right, well, we weren't going to do it until we had you first.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And I know we've had a lot of hurdles. We've been trying this, I think, since September.
Yeah.
And here we are in the new year.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be
So how was
with you.
your new year?
It was good, yeah. The holiday season at the food bank is so busy. So everybody, you're trying to survive kind of till Christmas Eve, and then it was nice to take some time off over the holidays.
Well, what's happening in Mississauga?
Well, Food Banks Mississauga is the central food bank for the city of Mississauga. We provide food through a network of over 60 food programs located in every corner of the city. And unfortunately, the usage of food banks has really gone up in the last number of years.
Which is a huge concern because
Absolutely.
I see that it continuing to increase even more.
Yes, and so people have seen it in the media across the country, in communities large and small, and we haven't escaped it here in Mississauga. In fact, food bank use grew faster in Mississauga last year than anywhere else in the province.
That was to see those numbers was shocking.
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we served about 19,000 of the 700 and something odd residents that live here in Mississauga, and now we're serving over 56,000, and we expect to be up kind of 72,000 people by the end of the spring. And so,
End of the spring.
yeah, so it's just more and more people. Every month we see coming to the food bank for the first time because they just can't afford their basic needs, and something's got to give. Yeah.
So what is that give? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, this is always the question. I mean, ultimately, the reason people need food banks is because they don't have enough money, right? And so when you don't have enough money to pay for everything, you have to pick and choose between what are the thing that you're going to let slide. You can't not pay your rent.
No.
You can only not pay your bills for so long. And so the thing that people skimp on then is their food. We hear lots of stories of moms and dads not eating so the kids can eat, eating lesser food, eating lower quality food. We were talking about you shop the flyers, you do all those things. Yeah. But when people have done all of those things and there's still not enough left, they got to come to the food bank. And so people come to the food bank, they can come to one of our agencies once a month, and they get 7 days worth of food to help offset some of those costs that they have.
Okay. And what do you think the main driver would be?
I think it's just...
I know there's several. But
yeah, I think it's the overall sense that incomes haven't kept up with the cost of living. One of the big ones for us is over 30% of the people using food banks in Mississauga, over 50% across the province, are people on social assistance. Mm-hmm. So if you get Ontario Works, which is welfare in Ontario, or the Ontario Disability Support Program, which is the program to support people who can't work because they have disabilities, the rates for those programs are far below the poverty line. Right. And so essentially, if you need to use one of those programs, a worker will say, here's how the program works, here's how you get the money, and here's a flyer for your local food bank, because they know they're not giving enough money for people to live on. So you can imagine if our provincial government increased the rates of those programs, perhaps instantly over 30% of food bank users would be better off and maybe not need the food bank.
So talking on the province,
yes,
and even bring in the federal government, what do you see your needs to be from them stepping forward?
Well, one thing a lot of people don't know is that food banks are not funded by the federal or provincial government. We do not receive any funding from either level of government. We did during the pandemic. There were federal funds that flowed through, but those are long gone now. And
so what do you think, because we firmly believe that this is something that's not just should be municipal, it should be provincial and federal. So what would you like to see from your provincial government, from the federal government, to try to support you in supporting all these residents in Mississauga?
Well, I think there's two ways to go about it. And the way that we have been advocating for is for the government to make policy changes, investments that puts money in people's pockets, because then they don't need the food bank. That would be our preferred method. So increase those social assistance rates, let's make minimum wage a living wage. Let's continue to ensure that all the programs that are supposed to support people having financial resources are there. Let's make sure settlement services give people accurate information about how much it costs to live in Canada so folks are equipped. Let's do all of those things at the provincial level. That's one way to do it. Or if the province is saying we're not going to invest in people, then invest in the food banks so that we can take care of people. But you can't do neither. You can't say, I'm not going to give people money to live, and I'm not going to give any money to any of the organizations that help people live. And that's kind of what it feels like where we're at in Ontario. And so MPPs will say, thanks so much, Meaghan, and pat me on the back. Thank you for all your hard work.
And then walk away.
Yeah, and it's very challenging to know how to respond because it's like, what have you done for this? You're not contributing to helping solve this problem.
And what would you like to see federally? That's the...
Yeah, federally, there's a number of programs. I think first off, the thing we have to acknowledge federally, though this doesn't impact us in Mississauga, food insecurity in the north is a unique issue that we should be ashamed of how hard it is for our northern neighbors to access affordable food.
I'm wondering, you mentioned the north. When you say that, I think you're talking mainly about the Bolton area, that sort of thing?
No, I'm saying like Canada's
north.
Native. Yeah, like Indigenous folks and northern communities. And so I think as there's a Food Banks Canada is a national association of food banks. And I think for me, like I live here in Mississauga, I feel responsible for what happens in Mississauga. But there's also a sense from a moral perspective, I can't feel satisfied if Mississauga has food. Well, my neighbors who are just as deserving as humans in Canada's north are paying $60 for a jug of orange juice. You know, like these kind of things. But on the federal level, the things that would impact across the country, EI reform, employment insurance reform is huge. 30 years ago, 75% of people who applied for EI got accepted and got that money. It's under 30% now. Really? And it's because EI is geared for people who work at one job, for one company, with one salary for a long time. And you both are saying to me, you're self-employed folks. Right. Yeah. So few people have a professional life like that anymore. And EI hasn't been modified to meet the needs. So when people are needing the support of the social safety net, when you fall on hard times between jobs, it's not strong enough to support them. So that's a big one.
And then there's people out there that have multiple jobs.
Exactly. We see that all the time. There's an increasing number of people using food banks who have jobs. Almost 30% of the people who come here have jobs, but they still just can't make it.
And that's, I wanted to touch on a little bit on the demographics.
Sure.
Right? Because I'm going to assume, without knowing, that they're changing. Are you finding that you're finding a lot more people reaching retirement age, having to need the uses or the services of the food bank?
Yeah, so seniors still only make up about 8% of the clients at the food bank, but it was only 6% 2 years ago. So it's an increasing number year over year, though the number is still small. The largest demographic group of food bank users is unattached singles. If you are a single adult, especially if you have a disability, or if you can't work for some reason, it is very challenging to afford all the necessities of life with one person and one income.
And that goes to what we were talking about earlier is housing and being able to afford rent, where if you're a couple, you at least have two people.
And so we've had lots of programs in Canada, like the Canada Child Benefit made an incredible difference in the number of families with kids using food banks. We saw that go down. Until last year, the number of kids using the food bank went back up again. But there's no program in Canada that provides for the financial needs of the single unattached adult. And that is the growing group. I realize it's not as warm and fuzzy as kids or seniors, but humans are humans, and these are the people in our community who need it the most. And so how do we serve the needs of those folks?
And I always wonder with that group and the senior group, how many are not accessing because they're too proud to come and access.
Absolutely.
That's definitely an issue. 100% is an issue, right? People are proud, right?
Oh, for sure. And when people do come to the food bank, like I get questions a lot of the time. People are like, how do you make sure people aren't abusing the food? That's probably the question I've answered the most in my 15 years here. And I mean, so we collect information from people about their income and their expenses, but there's no qualifying line. If you come to the food bank, we will help you. But you're right, we know 50% of the people in poverty out there will never darken the door of a food bank. They will do all the things that people do. You borrow from friends and family, you max out your credit cards, you sell your stuff. people start doing all kinds of things to avoid having to use the food bank.
And that, in the sense, is putting them even further behind the eight ball.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so, we run this program called Food Bank to Home, which is a home delivery program for people who physically can't get to the food bank. The majority of the people on the program are elderly, not even just seniors, elderly, but they're also poor. And their families can't care for them for whatever reason, all these situations. But like, for someone in their 80s to have to call a food bank to get to pens, it's really wrong. Something that, I think of, my grandparents, a few of my grandparents, I'm in my early 40s, but I just lost my last grandparent this year. When I think of my own grandfather and the needs that he had when he was in long-term care, to additionally not have the money and have to buy diapers, get diapers from a food bank, we've gone so wrong. Our society is organized around profit and organized around prioritizing increasing wealth. And there's just so many people who are being left behind.
So let's talk a little about infrastructure, food distribution. Like, where does the most of your food come from? And how is it distributed, amongst the different food banks within the city?
Yeah, so food banks like Food Banks Mississauga, a central hub like this, exists in most of Canada's large cities. And so what we focus on is the large-scale sourcing of food. And so we have a team like fundraisers who are food raisers. And we're really fortunate here in Mississauga that we're able to find about 85% of our food donated. And so it comes all across the supply chain, right? From farmers, we get stuff right from farms. We get those carrots that kind of have two legs. We get tiny onions, apples that are too big or too small.
Not aesthetically pleasing.
Exactly. Some of those seconds or kind of grade 2 vegetables.
But they still taste good.
They still taste just as good. Exactly. They're just weird looking. So we'll source those. We'll get things from manufacturers. So let's say a special Olympics campaign on your cereal box end. They pull them from the shelves. That stuff will come to us. So we'll get from manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors. We find, people like let's say a grocery store rejects an order of something. The transportation people will call us and say, "Do you want this?" But it's very ad hoc, right? It's a lot of you have to respond quickly. You have to be willing to kind of do something crazy, boots on the ground. It's a lot of hustle.
It's perishable.
It's perishable.
So you have to get that stuff out quickly.
Yeah, so about 50% of the food we do is fresh and frozen, and so that's more challenging to source all of that. And then I guess about 10% of the food comes from food drives, the traditional stuff you would think. So still in the community, the food we pick up from the fire stations and at the grocery stores makes up a big chunk of the food that we find. But we're very fortunate to have a great food raising team that's able to find it from across the province. And
now, touching on that, how much do the local food banks get themselves and how much do you provide them? Because obviously I'm very familiar with the Compass.
Sure, yeah.
And that's the one I've been affiliated with for years.
No, that's a great question because you gave a presentation to us at the PRCA maybe 2 years ago, and I didn't realize how the actual structure works.
Yeah.
Because as Sue mentioned, we live in the south.
Sure.
And our biggest, our food bank down there is the Compass.
Yeah.
We have a lot of food drives locally.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering about the food banks located in Malton, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
And when it's collected by the Mississauga Food Bank, how do you distribute that fairly to the different food banks across the city? Because some of them are going to be, their demand might not be as high as some of the others.
So we, of those 64 agencies, now 12 of them are neighborhood food banks, like the Compass, assigned a postal code area where anyone who lives in that postal code area who needs a food bank, this is the one you can go to get your 1 week of food. And so those agencies can order from us. We have an online ordering portal. There's caps set in there based on the volume of people that they serve. And then they can order from the system that they need. So we know that from our agencies, we have some agencies that 100% of the food they give out is what we give them. And we have other agencies like the Compass that have great local community support, and it's about half of their food comes from us. And so it's from about 50 to 100% depending on the needs of the agency. And then one of the initiatives we did this last year was a culturally responsive food project. We have a number of our agencies that are Black-led, Black-focused, Black-serving. And so we worked with those agencies to say what foods would be more appropriate for the folks that you're serving. We were able to find some money. And so now we also have a lot more coconut milk and some things that some of the African folks had identified. So we have a big African newcomer community, Caribbean folks, and a lot of items that people were just really excited to get.
So diverse food
Yes.
for diverse culture.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big part of what we think about too. Like, what are the basics that any culture can use?
Right.
But also for people who are, food's more than food, right? You know, food's not just calories. Food's not just calories in, calories out.
Right, right.
If you think about how your family celebrates, what are the
It's a
special
cultural
occasions
thing,
in
it's
your
a celebration
life,
thing.
food is
Right.
always a part of that.
Right.
And so we want people to be able to experience, all humans deserve to be able to have a birthday party and celebrate special occasions with their family and be able to use food as a way that brings people together. And so if we can provide recognizable items, it's one more way that people are feeling like they can be who they are and live the way they want to.
And which pockets do you think are the most challenged within our city?
I mean, the Black community continues in most communities to have the most challenges.
And
so
geographically, where would that, or is it scattered?
it's very spread out. It's
Okay.
very spread out. I think the Black community, you know, continues to struggle, and it was the leaders of our Black-led agencies came to us and said, "You're not doing enough for our community specifically." And we took that, you know, you take it on the
board.
chin and you say, "Okay, thank you for letting us know, and let's figure out what we can do to meet that need, and try to respond." And so I think we know that, you know, less than $100,000 of additional kind of food for that every year is not huge, but it's a step in the right direction to saying we hear you and we want to provide what you need. But it's tough. It's tough because there's lots of different needs,
Yeah.
lots of different people.
So let's go into who sponsors you.
Yeah.
Corporations, restaurants, grocery stores. Where else are you getting and what percentage of that is a whole? You've
Sure.
mentioned the farmers.
Yeah.
What percent, break down 100% where it's coming from.
Yeah. So, I mean, most charities just have to raise money to do their programs. We have two whole raising goals. So we've got this, you know, we need this year about 11 million pounds of food, and we also need between $8 and $9 million every year. And so, because we have, you know, about 40 staff, we have trucks, we have this warehouse, the
People have to get
infrastructure,
paid.
people have to get paid. And we want to make sure that we're paying people fairly. We're a living wage organization. 'Cause I would hate to see our workers
So they
needing
can
to
live
use the food
somewhere,
bank,
yeah.
right? You know what I mean?
The aesthetics would be bad.
That would be brutal.
Yeah.
And so, so about 50% of our cash resources come from individuals.
Okay.
So that is generous people who live here in Mississauga primarily.
So not major corporations
No,
so much, just
it's about
people
25% comes from
Interesting.
corporations, 50 from individuals.
Okay.
And then the other 25 is a combination of foundations, government,
Municipal
community
government?
groups. Yes, the
Municipal
municipal government is the only government we
Right.
receive funds from.
Yeah.
And I will say, the region of Peel has stepped up. And my peers who run food banks in other communities are like, "What are you getting from the region of Peel? How much is that per client?" We do the math. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to take that to my region and say, hey, region of Peel is giving $3 per client or whatever it is. You guys need to up your game." And so we're trying to leverage each other across
So you're
the
talking
province.
about like Brampton, you're talking about Caledon?
Yes, well, these
Okay,
would even
okay.
be, no, my contacts like in Waterloo
other regions.
and in
Others.
Ottawa,
Yes.
saying, "Have you gone to your region? What are they doing for you?" But Region of Peel,
Has
with
stepped
this
up.
emergency food fund last year, we were able to push forward again and increase it to $3 million, is saving the food programs in Peel right now, because there is no upper tier funding,
Right, right.
and it's tough in Peel. We don't have any media. We don't have a TV station. We don't have a radio station. We don't have a newspaper as
it's
much
really,
anymore.
Really hard to get the word
So
out.
it's
Yeah.
and so we
Yeah.
have to
And that's been our issue
Yes.
since we lost Rogers. It's been a decade of
Yeah.
very little media.
And so we're right next to a big city that has its own media and its own food programs and those things. And so it's tough to get the word out here. So
And it doesn't make much sense. I mean, when you think about it, the numbers that we have here in Mississauga, there's absolutely no reason.
we're Canada's 6th largest city.
So why don't we have our own media?
Because there's another one right next door. I guess it's not financially viable for those media companies. You know, I was actually thinking about this. Local journalism really is important for people to get connected with their community, whether it's issues like, folks are thinking about as, kind of community groups, your tax rates, your crime in your community, what's happening in your neighborhood. And we don't have a lot of opportunities for local journalism. I actually wondered, maybe this is one of the things that we should be asking the region. Maybe they should fund a local journalism initiative to help encourage the word of people to know more. Ooh, there we go.
Catherine Soplet
Yeah.
is one of our, and she's always been very pro and PPAG, and then the group that was down in Port Credit that's no longer, these struggling papers or whatever, and they're gone. So our thought was, well, let's try to do a, YouTube to try to bring more awareness out there. What are your thoughts? Like, how can we increase awareness in Mississauga with very little media?
I think it's tough. I think it's really tough. Like, I've really appreciated the reporting from The Pointer, that there's another local take on what's happening. I think it's really challenging. I've rejoined, Nextdoor app, but there's a lot of content to wade through on Nextdoor, but that's a way people are connecting. For me, I'm a political nerd, and so I often listen to city council or regional council on a Wednesday or a Thursday morning.
That's thing that's missing, right? Because we had Channel 10, and that was a way for a lot of local residents to, I guess keep in front of mind what's happening within the city. We don't have that anymore. So now a lot of it is word of mouth, and a lot of it is not correct information.
Yeah, then it goes through that, that game of broken telephone.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real loss.
And I still get a lot of my information from X or Twitter.
Yeah.
That's how I follow you guys, right? I know what you need and, repost that.
The Mississauga News does still have some local reporters, and there is still some that comes from there, but it's tough not having a lot of local journalism.
No.
And so
and they're struggling too.
Yes. Yeah. But it's because these are all symptoms of what we've prioritized as a society. We're saying journalism's not making money, so let's stop doing it.
But then you keep people in the dark.
Exactly.
People don't know what's going on.
It needs to be a service. Maybe it's not profitable, but it needs to provide a service to the community.
And from a resident perspective, we find that that's a huge problem, because we've got people that will come to us that, that they're in a silo. They don't know what people in a different area or different ward have the same issues. So that's how we come up with our issues, because people all over the city, or they feed them back to their residents association, and then we talk about it and decide what's important for us to
concentrate on,
talk about. And like we
they're
were
not
talking
one-offs.
about earlier, we
They're
were
not
talking
one-offs,
about
right?
the police budget and that 23.3% in 1 year, how that impacts all of us that pay taxes. That's a huge
And I want to live in a
increase.
safe community. I live in Ward 10. I don't, there's been a lot of thefts and a lot of the issues in the community.
Something like that. A lot of thefts. That's everywhere. Because we're having the same issues there too.
People do desperate things when they're in desperate situations.
Exactly.
And so I've been commenting on a lot of posts where people have been talking about, we need more police, we need to solve this crime issue.
But that's not the root.
The root is people doing desperate things to solve the sad situation they're in. And so investing an additional 23.3% in our police, there's no resources left for public health, mental health supports, for community interventions that help to boost community connectedness. Like, these kind of interventions will decrease crime, but it's not as straightforward as boots and officers on the ground.
Exactly, and it's not a direct, it's an indirect.
Yes, and it's not immediate. It will take time. But we can't just keep policing a community into being a place where people want to live. And people want to be connected, they want to know their neighbors. And, when we have this attitude of like, well, those are them, those are in other people, they're not like us. It creates these divides in our community instead of bringing together to tackle these issues that we all have.
And I mean, the saying for a very long time was, oh, that doesn't happen in our community.
It happens everywhere.
Yeah,
It does.
It doesn't matter.
I continue to be surprised how few people are aware that there is a food bank, let alone a network of 60-odd programs, and that there are 1 in 13 people in the city using a food bank. Like, people, I am surprised.
And that goes back to the silo.
Yes.
People just don't.
They just don't know.
They don't have any info. And I get this all the time. All the time people come up to me and say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. or I'm so concerned about this. I said, well, guess what? This ward is, this ward is, this ward is. We're all concerned about that.
Yeah. I think it's how Mississauga, like the kind of the lore of Mississauga, you know, created as sort of this beautiful bedroom community for people working downtown.
Right.
And we've had a hard time shedding that image. And I think shedding that understanding of who we are. We are a big city with big city problems.
Lots of
transit,
problems, yes.
housing, homelessness, all these issues. And I think it's almost like Mississauga needs to accept we've grown up now, you know, and these are the places we are. We can't go back.
No.
Mississauga's never going to be like it was, you know, when
Right.
Applewood was developed in 1968. Like, it's just not.
No. And the challenges associated with all of that. So going back to your challenges and the increasing demand that you see coming, how are you going to, or what are you doing at this point to tackle that? And how is that going to change where you're getting your supplies from and the increase that's needed?
2025 is going to be a tough year for food banks because this demand has really been catching up with us. And we've been very fortunate that people were incredibly generous during the pandemic and we were able to build up some reserves. I try to explain it to the staff. Reserves is a business word for savings. You know what I mean? Like, let's just talk about it like what it is. We had some savings, but we've been spending it to offset the increased cost of running the food bank.
And I think a lot of the generosity was due to people maybe saving as well.
Could have been.
And maybe they're now hitting that point where they don't have that savings anymore.
We
so
are.
Their investment or their generosity is kind of brought home.
We have had people come to us and say, last year I gave to you, but this year I need to use the services.
Right.
So and more people of medium income, middle class folks give a larger percentage of their income to charity than wealthy folks. And so as the middle class is squeezed
to lower middle
as they get
class.
older,
Right? And they are now relying on their reduced amount of income based on
there's
what's
whatever
the
it
word?
is, their pension or
and
their
so on.
RSPs,
They're not going to have
their
the ability.
savings.
Exactly. They have to now worry about themselves.
So our goal really right now is we have to grow our fundraising capacity. We need to help encourage both corporations and individuals in the community to recognize that the food bank is worth investing in. People often want to have their name on a hospital room or a brick on a building. People don't really want their name on a food bank in the same way. It doesn't have the kind of it's not really a sexy cause to be associated with, but we need some people to bite the bullet and be associated with us.
Right.
And the food bank, pre-pandemic, it cost us $2-3 million a year to run. Now it's $9 million.
Wow.
And it's the same 700,000 people in Mississauga that are asking for the same amount of money.
That's just from 3 years ago.
Right. So to have to ramp up your fundraising, think about sales. 300% sales increase in 4 years,
crazy.
that's very difficult. And so we're going to be investing in continuing to raise awareness, continuing to raise the word, continue to raise money and try and engage and have folks understand the depth and the breadth of this issue and that it does take all of us in Mississauga to tackle it. And that we need food, we need a can of tuna, we need a can of soup, but we also need financial resources to get that food out to the people who need it.
Well, hopefully with discussions like this,
it
might open up people's minds and so on. Because I don't think people, as you mentioned, I don't think a lot of people think about food banks in that way.
I think
I think a lot of people are, I don't know if they're kidding themselves or, you wouldn't think that, I'm never going to need a food bank. But you never know.
Well, and I think that's part of it too, is like, there are things you give to in the community, a museum, an art gallery, a hospital. You want them to be successful so that you can also access their services. A food bank, you're giving to it so someone else can access it. It is a true other-centered gift. It's not, I hope I get to the front of the line. It's, I hope I'm never in that line. Right. And so, I get that there's a number of hurdles. And I think people have misunderstandings about why people use the food bank, who's using it, the concern about people taking advantage, because that's been in the media a lot the last few years.
We were talking about that.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think that many people really take advantage of a food bank.
We don't think so either. So we used to, until 2016, we did have a yes or no. If you had more money than above the line, I'm sorry, you don't qualify. You're too wealthy to use the food bank. but 99.9% of the people qualified. And we're like, this is crazy. Why are we doing all this work to weed out the like 0.001% and making it awkward and uncomfortable and people being worried they'll be rejected? So we stopped doing it.
I mean, let's face it. Somebody that has the nerve to walk in
With
to
fake documents?
food bank and say, "I need food."
You need courage to be able
That's
to do that.
right,
Yeah.
and
we just-
desperation.
and
we
we-
need desperation.
We just decided if someone wants to make up fake documents and go through all this rigmarole to like scam a food bank, God love them. They've
Yeah.
got bigger challenges than we can face, and we're just going to focus on serving people and not worry about it.
and I just don't see people doing that.
We don't. Now, there have been folks who don't understand what a food bank is or who it's for. And so part of our intake process when anyone shows up here or at a neighborhood food bank for the first time is we say, a food bank's a charitable organization supported by people in the community to help people who don't have money have access to food. So welcome here, and if that's you, we're happy you're here. We'll feed people the first time, but by making that statement, it gives people an opportunity to self-select out. If they thought it was, this is for everyone, it's a free government service, anyone can go. And there's some misunderstandings because the concept of food banks doesn't exist everywhere in the world. But that's how we've addressed it from an education perspective.
Well, and I think just basing it on income, I don't think that's really a good way of doing it, because just because somebody might be, I guess, deemed like a high income earner, right? You have to delve into where's that money going? What are their financial commitments?
Yeah.
Where they're at? So they may be, deemed as high income, earners, but how much of that is going out to other things, and what's left for food? Right?
Exactly.
So,
We
Or
don't
are
know.
they out of work?
Are they out of work?
Right.
Are they supporting a sick family member? Are they supporting a sibling or a child who's
Right.
going to school
right. So
full
there's
time?
variables.
You have
there's
no
variables that you have to.
and that's I would say the biggest thing I've learned over my 15 years here is how little we know about anyone else's life. And people, I often find myself like, some people's lives, man, like people just, you can handle one disaster, maybe two. You get hit with a third thing, it's really hard.
And then it's the capacity of those individuals to be able to handle it.
And
Some
the
person can have an
resources
issue.
or the network around them to help them handle it.
Right. Some people can handle more issues than others.
Yeah.
Some can't handle anything.
Yeah. And I mean, and so my hope for the future is that food bank use can become sporadic, that it's used in emergencies, that it's not the way tens of thousands of my
That
neighbors are
rely on it on
surviving.
an everyday
Yes.
basis.
Yeah,
Right,
depending
right,
on-
right.
But we will continue to be here as long as people need us. It's tough.
So that goes into my next thought. How can groups like ourselves, MIRANET, other city groups, help? What can we do to help you guys do what
Aside
you
from the
do?
traditional food drives.
Yeah.
Because I think most of the groups around the city are consistently doing food drives. But are there other avenues that we can
Yeah.
take to?
So the first one is the awareness, like we've been talking about. Please say to somebody else, hey, did you know 1 in 13 people in our city use the food bank? Everyone should be saying, holy cow,
Right.
that's too much. So that's the first thing. We just need to make people aware. The second thing is
So getting the message
just
out.
getting the message out. It exists, it's bad, and it's getting worse, and it's here in our community. The second thing is I would encourage people to consider giving financial resources. We can stretch money better than we can stretch food that you buy at the store. Because you buy a can of tuna for $2, we probably bought it for 50 cents. And not just that, we can find, like I said, 85% of our 10 million pounds last year was donated. We have an amazing skill at finding free food, but we got to drive the truck there, we got to pay the person who called the guy, and we need, so if people want to do a drive, we have an online portal called Hunger Warriors. You can set up a page and invite your community to give. That's the best way to make the biggest impact. And then I think the other thing is bring your family out to volunteer. Come and join us at something.
So
Educate your
volunteerism.
kids. Have them see what food banks are all about. They probably have seen food drives at school. It's amazing. I mean, kids get it. They're like, oh, there's people who's hungry. We better do something. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Exactly.
obvious to them.
And I always like at our debates, we've always said, bring food, but I always think it was the big
Bring a
jar,
cash jar.
the big jar.
Well,
we would pass that around before anybody got out the door.
Yeah.
Because I always felt, you're here, we put this on for you. Give us just even a toonie.
Yeah.
Even a toonie. If everybody in that room gave us a toonie, we'd have a good amount of money to give back to
Absolutely.
the food
Now
bank.
you have the debits. So
Yeah.
that's
But
all
and
it
the
is.
thing is, too, is like people don't keep a can of tuna in their purse, but they do keep a toonie.
Yes.
And so cash is always available. People don't carry around
But
cans
they
of
also
food.
have the Interact cards.
Yep.
So
Yes.
even if you don't have cash in your
Yep.
wallet,
Yeah, that's
Right?
the nice
Yeah, we do
thing
have
now.
little tappers.
The
Yeah,
tappers
yeah.
now.